think is the fastest estate car in the world? Your mind probably wanders to the Audi RS6, Mercedes E63, maybe even the new M5 Touring.
Well, I'm afraid not, because it's this 6-litre V8, 800 horsepower, 9,500 RPM. Yep, I'm not joking, this MG Rover is the fastest wagon in the world.
Back in 2003, this MG ZT-T accomplished a top speed of 225.6 miles an hour. That makes it faster than a Ferrari Enzo, a McLaren P1, even a Ford GT. It matches a Noble M600.
It still holds the record to this day, more than 20 years on. Yes, estate cars have started doing Nürburgring laps and would run rings around this thing through the corners, but in terms of sheer speed in a straight line, this is the Bugatti Veyron of wagons. So where did this monster of a ZT-T come from then? Well, let's do a history lesson on MG and the ZT-T.
MG is about as quintessential a British sports car company as there's possible to be. Standing for Morris Garages, MG was the sports car division of Morris. Starting off with stuff like this in the 1920s, they then made stuff like this in the 1940s, these in the 50s, before the real glory days of MG came through with the MG A, B and C in the late 50s and into the 60s. Then came the British Leyland era, where really all they did was rebadge Austin Rover products. Then came MG Rover, where apart from the MGF, TF and SV, everything else was a badge-engineered Rover. The Rover 25 became the MG ZR, the Rover 45 became the MG ZS, and then the 75 became the ZT. The 75 Estate became the ZT-T. I owned a green ZT-T and I absolutely loved that car. It was £1,500, British Racing Green, and it had the 2.5 litre KV6 with a manual gearbox. I loved it, but that didn't stop James May crashing into it, leading to the car getting a light restoration at the smallest cock. My favourite thing about it was the white wheels. I will now happily have white wheels on most cars I own for the rest of my life. My 620 Ti has already been the next victim.
So what is this thing then? Well, MG gave their marketing department a blank check to build the fastest estate car in the world. They wanted to start selling V8 ZTs in the US. So they gave the engineers this car and no financial limit. So this is what happens when engineers can just go nuts on what is fundamentally a Rover 75 underneath. Called the X15 project or the ZT-T Bonneville, it was MG's way of showing that their cars can deal with extreme performance, even though under the bonnet there's nothing remotely resembling a factory engine. But in terms of marketing, a V8's a V8. MG used the SoCal Speed Shop in California to build this car, and they were simply given no financial limit and one main goal: to make this thing the first estate car to crack 200 miles an hour using the Bonneville salt flats. John, this car set the record in 2003. Where do you come into the story ending up owning this thing?
MG unfortunately went bankrupt, as you probably know. Cars were sold off by the liquidator. Long story, but I managed to end up with this car. It should never have gone into private hands, but it escaped. I bought it and obviously did the obvious thing with it, wanted to run it.
Yeah, so MG set the record at 225, but you have since been back and have done your own running in it.
A friend and I went back and we ran the car 4 times in 2007 and 2008, and on a fraction of the factory budget, we actually went faster.
How much faster?
226 and change.
Okay, so you actually officially broke MG's factory record with you and your mate.
We did, yeah, and a couple of friends.
That's insane. Okay, well, I mean, we're here at JD Classics because this car's up for sale.
Yeah.
Why are you selling it?
I had it a long time, bought it back in 2006. I was going to go back to Bonneville. I had a fully funded sponsorship package a few years back. We were going to crank it up to 1,000 horsepower. We were going to chase a record, and Peter Stevens redesigned the aero front and rear. We reckon we could have taken the record at which was 249, but it would have meant cutting the car up. There would have been a lot of butchery, changing the top end of the engine, cutting up the cage, and a little bit reluctant to do that. COVID hit, sponsorship package fell through. Which is probably just as well. So it means the car is exactly as it was when it ran and when the factory ran it. I think it needs to have a new home. Really, it either needs to be run again or maybe in a museum or something. And I've got other projects. So
you reckon another 200 horsepower out the engine and some aero mods, and this would have done essentially 250. I came into today not realising how legit a racer you are. You go out to Bonneville with other cars than this. You've got stuff out there and you compete regularly. I've
been racing ever since. Prior to running at Bonneville, I was circuit racing over here doing sort of pro-am stuff with Anthony Reid, who at the time was MG's works driver, racing for them at Le Mans in touring cars. So we were doing pro-am stuff over here. So when we did our project, we had Anthony as a consultant, Sterling Moss, Peter Stevens, of course, and Andy Green, the world land speed record holder. He was our parachute consultant. So we had a pretty good team for a couple of amateurs.
What does this feel like at over 200 miles an hour?
Well, you're not really driving the car. I mean, you sit there, you're in your 5-layer fire suit, you're wearing wrist restraints, so you've got very minimal movement with your hands. You're strapped into the car, you've got a harness device on, it's 105 degrees. You brace your elbows at the side here, you literally move the wheel a millimetre or so and the car will move 10 feet
this
across.
Sounds terrifying, John.
So really all you're doing, you're a passenger, you're kind of clinching and you're kind of hoping the car goes in the right direction, but it controls an illusion out there. You just kind of point it in the right direction, keep your foot down and hope you don't go off the track.
Okay, and have you had any sketchy moments in it?
Several.
How many 200 mile an hour plus runs have you done in this car, do you think?
Well, over 20.
Right.
Easy, 20, 25 runs, I would say.
What's been the sketchiest moment?
Back in 2008, about 3 weeks before Bonneville, I was in a biplane crash and broke all my ribs, sternum, wrist and neck and stuff. And that was 3 weeks before Speed Week. But I had to sort of drag myself out of there and buy the car, or we would have had to give all the sponsorship money back and we'd spent it. So there really wasn't an option. 2 big moments. First run in the car, it's a long story, better told over a beer. The car would hit 223 at the 3 mile marker, 224 at the 4, and 225 at 5. So
it
3
takes
mile,
a mile to
just
add a
to
mile
ease
per
the
hour.
car up, yeah. So 3 mile marker, you're running at 223, huge great bang, the car turned right and went off the track. So Bonneville's different to circuit racing. Number one, weight is your friend. So this car has half a ton of extra lead in it just to keep it planted on the ground. The other thing is when things go wrong, you can't back off the throttle. You're running on, it's like running on ice. You've got skinny, slick tires, and with 650 foot-pounds of torque, you got it.
Loop it.
So the car's off the track out of control, but you've got to keep your foot in it. So you're doing everything that you wouldn't do on a circuit. Anyway, it took about a mile to straighten it up. Then there was another bloody great bang, and the car went off the other side of the track. Took about a mile to straighten it up. Then we stopped. Anyway, what had happened was the back bumper had blown out on one side first, so the thing turned right like a tank. And then the second bang was the car turning off the other way. So that was the first run. Then the second run after that,
I'll give it another go.
I kind of thinking we had the biplane crash, number one, strike one.
Yeah.
We had the incident with the bumper, strike two. Nothing else can go wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong. So get back in the car again. Fantastic run, perfect gear changes, could be on for a record. Through the 5 mile marker, pull the parachute, sitting there, because you have to keep your foot flat on the floor when you pull the chute so it deploys.
Yes.
So you're still hurtling towards basically the swamp at the end of the course. There's the 6 mile marker. Parachute hadn't opened. So I pulled the reserve chute, because the car has 2 chutes.
Yeah.
Both chutes came out at once, and the thing stopped dead in about 50 feet. I was thrown forward, and I stretched the belts and cracked the windscreen with my head. But fortunately, I had a harness device, and otherwise it probably wouldn't have been too good.
Yeah, I think I'm naive in terms of how much braking force parachutes can create. I thought it'd be, you'd have a brake pedal and they would just be additional.
No. If you pull one chute, it just glides to a halt over half a mile. You pull 2, it's violent, and the thing just literally stands on its nose. But that was the first day of Speed Week, which is a little bit of a problem because we'd bust the windscreen. So what we actually did, not sure I should tell you this, for the rest of Speed Week, we put a towel over the front screen and we didn't tell anybody.
Keep the car cool, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got it. So every time we came up to the line, we'd wait to the very last minute, and when we were waved off, one of our guys would just whip the towel off like a toreador and off we went. And we managed to get away with it for all Speed Week. They knew what was going on, but a bit like they said to Burt Munro, they come a long way, let them run.
Okay. Well, some people, the naive, would look at this and think it's a ZT-T. Other people would look at it and see it as virtually a drag racing NASCAR just before someone comes along and snaps it up. Can we start it up?
Oh, yeah.
Before we dive deeper into that crazy MG's engineering, and trust me, the startup is well worth waiting for, I need to introduce you guys and girls to this impressive piece of kit from the sponsors of today's video, Red Magic. If you've never seen one of these things before, in here is a Red Magic 9S Pro, a dedicated gaming phone. Let's unbox it and see what's in here. The Red Magic 9S Pro comes in great quality packaging with a quick start guide, this cool art bookmark thing, and a Type-C charging cable. On the home screen, you can enable Mora, who's your digital assistant. Just have a little chat with Mora, shall we?
Captain, stop! I surrender!
That just happened. Digital assistant, we all need one. This is a really solid piece of kit. Brushed metal, nice straight edges all round. What's really cool is that the cameras on the back are flush. The 9S Pro has something called a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 leading version. I have no idea what that means, but I gather it's a seriously powerful processor to just have chilling in your phone. Speaking of chilling, the 9S Pro has a cooling fan that's disguised as one of the cameras on the back, and that thing can spin up to 22,000 RPM while gaming to keep the phone cool. That is twice as fast as an Aston Martin Valkyrie's V12. What would a 22,000 RPM V12 sound like? You can also manually turn on the gaming fan and it makes this noise. I'm gonna say it's a flat plane crank V8. I'm gonna say that's a McLaren. I reckon that's a twin turbo 3.8 going on there. Right, let's do some gaming. You literally flick this little switch here and you're into gaming mode. Let's go into Asphalt Legends. Sounds about right. You know where you get like generational athletes? I was generationally bad at video games. I think I'll finish first though. The screen is massive, the graphics are pretty incredible. It's apparently got 12 gigs of RAM, which, according to the guys buying camera who are much techier than me, that's very impressive for a mobile phone. I'll trust them. If you're a bit of a gamer, or you want to get back into it after your Midnight Club or Need for Speed heyday, click the link in the description below to bag yourself a Red Magic 9S Pro, get some car games on there, and maybe try and outdo the 200-mile-an-hour MG. Speaking of which,
looking down the car, the only other additions are these two strakes, one on either side of the roof. The aim of these is to keep the airflow as smooth as possible flowing over the car, keeping it attached and not going everywhere and causing vortices, causing friction and therefore drag. These two simple strakes on the roof will have kept this MG stable and smooth at over 200 miles an hour. The wheels and tyres are one of the most iconic parts of this car. They're actually based on the front wheels and tyres you would find on a top fuel dragster. They look very dragster and very NASCAR with this tyre writing. Because of what they're based on, they're incredibly narrow, and I love these streamliner hubcaps on them. It's so Bonneville. Now, you'd expect the wheels and tyres at the back, with the amount of power this thing creates, to be about this size. You'd be wrong. These tyres, well, reaching in there, they're pretty much the same size as the fronts. They are so narrow. That's because of two things. One, the gearing is so long that you're not putting serious amounts of spiky horsepower through them. And also because that engine has slide throttles on it, I've been told to drive this thing, you have to imagine you've got a dozen eggs under the throttle pedal. You are not mashing it into the ground to get over 200 miles an hour. You are using the entire Bonneville salt flats and really easing the car into it. Therefore, you're not slamming all that horsepower through this tiny contact patch, and you're easing it up to over 225. For an 800 horsepower car, these tyres are scarily narrow. Now to the main event. What does a 200 mile an hour MG have under the bonnet? This is a 6-litre V8 developed by the guys and girls at Roush, that lot that are famous for making Mustangs fast and that. The block itself is Ford, and that totally makes sense because the V8 ZT on the road had a 4.6-litre Ford modular V8. Those were called the ZT-260, so they could have called this thing the ZT-800. It creates 800 horsepower with no forced induction thanks to the fact that it revs to 9,500 RPM. Now it hits those numbers because it's got a NASCAR bottom end and a Panos LMP1 top end, and all of this is mated to a 5-speed NASCAR transmission. That is a serious motorsport sandwich. Like all motorsport applications, the details in this engine bay are stunning. This massive air filter on top that then leads into a carbon plenum and carbon rocker covers. There's heat-proof tape all over the exhaust manifolds, all of the different linkages and lines for the fuel, the coolant. It's also got a carbon fibre engine mount. I've never seen anything like that apart from on stuff like the Cerberus Speed 12. What a piece of kit. All of this is in a Rover 75, an MG ZT. It's absolutely unbelievable. So this engine was the key to that record. On the first few runs, they just tested things out, got up to about 160. Then after 3 or 4 runs, they managed to crack 200 miles an hour, getting up to 207. Then they managed to just eke out more and more from this car and achieved that 225.6 miles per hour. Just imagine if they'd strapped a supercharger to the top of this thing. It would be insane. We've been told if you actually take the top of this airbox off, in there you can see the slide throttles on each throttle body there. John, if you flex the throttle a bit, and as you flex the throttle back and forward, they open and close. That makes the throttle incredibly sensitive, so you can be really precise with your inputs. And how beautiful is that as a piece of mechanics? At the back, the motorsport stuff continues. This is the rear of the roll cage, which started pretty much where the engine mounts were, right at the front of the car, comes all the way through and ends here. This in here is actually the dry sump system for that NASCAR block. There are some serious hoses connected to it to lubricate that 9,500 RPM engine. Down here is the fuel flap. Now it looks like it's covered in pen, but it's actually nail varnish. This is so cool. So the scrutineers, to make sure you haven't tampered with the fuel, will tape the fuel filler down, but then also apply a certain color of nail varnish, striping over the tape to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. So every little dot of nail polish down there signifies a record run. That is history right there in nail polish. Now the reason we have this stick here is because of what's weighing down the tailgate. Swing this down. That is what slows this car down from 225 miles an hour. A double parachute system. There's handles inside, which we'll see in a bit. You yank on them, these fly out that way. I've been told if you were to stand here, I would literally end up through the wall of JD Classics here. They are that spring-loaded and powerful. This car doesn't have any brakes. They were stripped off for aerodynamic reasons, and also they'll clog up with all the salt from the salt flats. So it has 0 brakes. That is it. But there's nothing to hit in Bonneville, so you don't need to slam on the brakes, or you shouldn't need to, otherwise you've done something very wrong. But if you see the Bonneville swamp coming, maybe pull on the handles. Maybe both. Something I didn't have on my ZT-T was these centrally mounted, incredibly fistable twin exhaust outlets here. When I say this car is straight pipes, you look underneath it, it's quite literally straight pipes. They come out of the manifolds, meet somewhere in the middle, and then just parallel straight down to the back of the car. It's very, very functional. A normal ZT-T would have the exhaust, this little heat shieldy bit here. Another thing at the rear that I didn't have on my ZT-T was one of these. Now, this may just look like a kind of weird looking tow hook, but it's actually a push hook. So a massive tow truck comes up behind this MG, pushes onto this and takes the car up to 45 miles an hour. Because these land speed cars are so long geared, instead of them burning out their clutches and buggering their gearboxes by trying to get away from a standstill, they can get some assistance up to 45 miles an hour, and then you simply go on the throttle and pull away up to 200 miles an hour. This is also where the parachutes are linked to. So instead of tearing off the tailgate of the car, they're locked into here, they go off, and this takes all the brunt. So despite these things, the ZT-T from the outside looks remarkably stock. What's it like on the inside? Possibly my favourite bit of the car is this interior, because so much of it is still stock ZT. The dashboard is completely untouched. We've got additions that we'll get to in a bit, but fundamentally, this is all 2003 MG ZT. If you guys remember the restoration video we did with my car at Smallest Cog, you'll remember that I switched out this little plate here with all the window switches on it. It's exactly the same as in my car. The front two seats are proper, well, they feel like NASCAR bucket seats, but they've put the half leather trim that pretty much every single MGZ car has onto them. It's just been kind of spliced over the bases. My ZS180 has the full leathers, but pretty much every other Z car was trimmed like this. It's the blue and black, by the way, just in case you're wondering. The rear seats are completely stock. They've just been left in. They've kept it a full family station wagon, as you Americans would call it. Now, let's talk about the additions in here. I mean, I had to get over the roll cage. There's also a net, window net, a la NASCAR. Got two big warnings up here. So this yellow one is a coolant temperature warning, and then the red one here is an oil pressure warning. If any of those go, you need to stop very quickly. Up here, we've got water temperature and a rev counter straight out of a NASCAR. And then I was wondering what these three toggles are here. It turns out they are the triple fire suppression system. So there are two fire extinguishers just behind me here, and then this piping here feeds it straight into the footwell and up around the driver. The reason for this serious a fire suppression system is that at Bonneville, you can end up 5 miles away from anyone else by doing 200 miles an hour straight down a salt flat. So if a fire starts, you're kind of on your own for quite a long time. So these extinguishers will just be going off, creating this cabin of safety until someone gets to you. It's kind of grim that that needs to be there, but it's super cool that it is. Another non-standard ZT addition are these two handles here. Now, they're cable tied for a very good reason. That one there is your first parachute release, and that one there is your second parachute release. The switches you always like to see in a race car are these three here: fuel, ignition, and start. We've travelled 4.5 hours to JD Classics to come and film this car today, so it'd be rude to not give that NASCAR LMP1 V8 a bit of a tickle. Should we start it up? Let's start it up. Go. Ho, ho, ho. The vibrations through this car are unbelievable. So it just needed that initial warm up and then didn't even touch the throttle, straight idling. That shows a sorted engine.
Yeah, that's sweet. You can give it a rev now.
Yep. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
My foot clearly moving.
Give it 1 to 6.5.
Yeah? You sure?
Yeah, go on.
What a car. This is an MG.
The UK hasn't had too much to shout about until quite recently in terms of car records, with trailblazers like McMurtry with the insane Spearling fan car being the only thing to get hyped up about. Although we're the home of the vast majority of F1 teams, our road car industry isn't anything to write home about these days. We're not exactly setting the world on fire with records anymore. What's cool for us big MG fans is the brand is really coming back with a bang. You will have all seen the 500 horsepower Cyberster, and at Goodwood they revealed a coupe version. And then in the same fold as the X15 Bonneville, they've also revealed a land speed record concept, designing a car that would hypothetically be capable of 258 miles an hour. Maybe MG will be back at Bonneville in the not too distant future.
Nowadays, an 800 horsepower estate isn't that big a deal. An Audi RS6 could spend a day in a workshop or a tuner and end up probably surpassing that figure. You have to place this thing in the context of its day, 2002, 2003. The McLaren F1 was around, spitting out 640. That was the crazy supercar then. The Veyron with 1000 hadn't even come out yet. So a family estate car with 800 would have been completely mind-blowing. This car is currently for sale here at JD Classics, so if one of you guys fancies it, the link is in the description below. I know what I do. Yes, you could probably achieve similar speeds with a supercharged M5 Touring or a heavily tuned RS6, but they're a bit obvious, aren't they? This thing is way, way cooler.